50R. We turn now to the Gulf of Mexico. New evidence has badly shaken the Obama administration's rosy narrative about the alleged disappearance of most of the oil that gushed into the Gulf of Mexico from BP's blown-out well. Early this month, a report by government scientists declared three-quarters of the oil had vanished, either collected or dispersed. But numerous reports contradict the administration's sanguine picture of the cleanup effort. Researchers at the University of Georgia said about three-quarters of the oil is still lurking below the surface of the Gulf and may pose a threat to the ecosystem. Separately, a study released last week by the University of South Florida scientists found oil in sediments of an underwater canyon and evidence that the oil has become toxic to critical marine organisms. On Thursday, a team of researchers confirmed the existence of a vast underwater oil plume stretching 21 miles from BP's blown-out well. Christopher Reddy of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution said the amount of oil in the plume is unknown. Speaking before the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Thursday, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration senior scientist Bill Lair acknowledged that only 10% of the oil has been cleaned up and that large quantities evaporated or dispersed remain in the Gulf ecosystem. The subcommittee chair, Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts, closed the hearing criticizing the administration's so-called premature celebration and urged further vigilance.
BP, in my opinion, will try to walk away as fast as they can. BP lowballed the size of the spill in the first week, saying it was 1,000 barrels. Then they said it was 5,000 barrels. They knew in the first week that it was a huge spill. It turns out to be between 53,000 and 63,000 barrels per day. That is not 1,000 barrels. That changed the level of response in those first weeks, in those first months, because of the misleading information. People were less vigilant than they would have been. The response was less intense than it would have been if we understood the magnitude.
And this is Christopher Reddy of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution about the amount of oil in the plume.
All I can tell you is that we found a plume, and I can't tell you how much oil was in it because we don't have the values yet. We know there is a plume. We know its length. We know its shape. We know that we collected water samples in it. And when we have analyzed those samples, we'll be able to constrain what the inventory of those compounds were in there.
We're joined now by Ian McDonald, an oceanographer and expert on measuring oil spills from Florida State University. He also testified at Thursday's hearing and said the actual amount of oil removed from the Gulf is around 10% and predicts the spill will likely remain harmful for decades. Ian McDonald, welcome to Democracy Now!
Hello.
Can you talk about what you have found? Talk about what the government says and talk about what all these different studies, including yours, are saying now about the amount of oil in the Gulf.
Well, what's happening now, we can confirm that the oil that had been visible, that had been so troubling to us and to the ecosystem as floating layers on the surface of the ocean, has largely disappeared from view. But that does not mean that it's gone from the ecosystem or gone from our problems. Much of that oil has either sunk to the bottom and has become shallowly buried in marine sediments or in coastal soils, where it will pose, as I said, a threat to the ecosystem for years to come. Or potentially it remains in dissolved layers, both at the surface and in the deep water layers that Reddy and Camilli and his other colleagues at Woods Hole referred to. And as you said at the opening, this scenario of where the oil is and the concerns that it raises about the future of the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem contradict the way in which this government report of August 4th was rolled out by Jane Lubchenco and by Carol Browner.
Talk about how this study by NOAA was done by the National Oceanographic Institute.
Well, the hearing on Thursday before Representative Markey's subcommittee was pretty remarkable. The questioning went on for over an hour and a half. And during the course of the questioning of the three government witnesses that were there, Bill Lair of NOAA, Paul Anastas of Food and Drug of EPA, and Don Kramer of the Food and Drug Administration, Markey focused on Lair and made Lair roll back the statement that 3/4 of the oil was gone. And he was obliged to admit that, in fact, probably 80% of the oil is still in the ecosystem. It seemed clear from Lair's testimony that what happened was that he and other scientists at NOAA compiled a report, which they intended as an internal document for the responders so that they could understand the different categories of oil, what had happened to these oil, this budget, as it were, to guide some of the response efforts. And at some point, this report, intended as a private document, became a very public document and was presented by Lutsenko, Browner, and by the White House as a scientific result, definitively showing that the oil was gone and inferring that there was a little further threat to the ecosystem. What was presented as scientific fact is largely conjectural and contained no references to the scientific literature, none of the algorithms or formulas or other information that would allow investigators or independent investigators to assess what had been done. So this made what should have been science into a policy and PR exercise, and that's an unfortunate turn of events in informing the public about the next future of this oil disaster.
So where did this report come from, Ian McDonald?
Well, it came from NOAA. It was written by Bill Lair, who is a physicist and a senior responder to oil spills within NOAA. And he put it together. What it is it's the results from a series of spreadsheets and other algorithms that look at the different pieces of the oil, the different components of the oil, separated between the water and the burning and the skimming. And it says, well, you know, knowing what we know about how oil behaves in the Gulf of Mexico ecosystem, knowing what we know about the type of oil that was discharged, what's likely to have happened to it. And then it presents these projections, these model results, which describe, you know, they have good numbers on the burning and skimming. They know how much they recovered with the skimming operations, and they have a reasonable idea of what the burning does. But all of the rest of the report is not based on measurement, but based on theoretical models, which were not available. So this report, which should have been science, in fact, became a policy and PR. And that continues an unfortunate trend within NOAA of rolling out seemingly authoritative statements about the oil discharge only to have to correct them or revise them subsequently. And it's not the way we want to see our government handling such a catastrophe, a calamity for such a large region.
Would you call this government report a cover-up, Ian McDonald?
No, I wouldn't call it a cover-up. I would call it a misdirection. I think it was an example of taking a rosy scenario, which was compiled prematurely and was still under progress by the scientists who were in charge of putting it together, and then projecting it as scientific fact. So that's not a cover-up per se, but it very much, you know, it's much in line with the early statements that Representative Markey referred to, where the government and BP said confidently that there was only 1,000 barrels or 5,000 barrels coming out of the well, and we know that it was at least 10 times that, and we're subsequently we're forced to admit that. I guess the other thing that the oil budget does not account for, and which I've been concerned about, as have others, is the amount of gas that was released. This is an unprecedented discharge, this exploded well belonging to BP, unprecedented in the fact that it was in 5,000 feet of water and that the discharge went on in an uncontrolled way for nearly 100 days. That's really never occurred before, and much of the science, as Reddy and his colleagues have told us, still needs to be done to figure out where all that oil is. But we do know from BP's own numbers that the oil comprised about 3,000 cubic feet per barrel of gas. If you present the numbers not in units of volume, in like cubic feet or barrels of oil, but in equivalent units of mass or equivalent units of energy, barrel of oil equivalent,